Okay, wish you all a good day, dear cbse students. So we will have some classes arranged for English under the auspices of Masters Academy, Nileshwaram. In fact, some chapters might have been finished already by your school through online transaction methodology. So actually we intend to give some grammar classes, but before we enter the broad spectrum of grammar, let's discuss some chapters because that will be a nourishment for your learning enterprise. So I think I will just focus on a couple of poems in our first unit which haven't been touched upon by your school teachers. Already they have discussed, as my knowledge tells me, they have discussed a letter to God, then one more, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. So these two chapters have already been begun by your teachers. So today I think I will just deal with two poems which haven't been dealt with. Okay. So inviting your earnest attention and concentration, I may begin. So I'm thankful to Masters Academy, Nileshwaram, its pioneers like Manoj and others who have ventured such a project and invited me to discuss a couple of chapters. So I will just talk about the poems of Robert Frost. You have a couple of poems, Dust of Snow, then Fire and Ice. So before we enter the poems, let me talk a little about Robert Frost, the great poet laureate in English literature, an American poet, a great literary celebrity. Okay. Now, a usually expressed view of Frostian poetry is that it begins in pleasure and ends in wisdom. Please mark it. His poetry begins in pleasure and ends in wisdom. At the outset, you may feel that Frostian poetry is very simple. It gives you a lot of pleasure. It takes you to tremendous enjoyment. But as you proceed further with the poem, as you enter deep into the poem, you will understand that it has many dimensions. It has many layers of inner meanings. It has plenty of connotation or inner meaning. Denotation is surface level meaning, the meaning that comes to your mind as and when you read it. And connotation is another dimension, another sense and meaning which you may catch on deeper reading, indulged reading. Can you understand? So most of his poems are connotative because they have many implied meanings. And there are some very familiar, very famous poems by Frost. And some of his lines are very famous. For example, I will just give you a line. But I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. A couple of lines which have become very famous. Even our former Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, used to read these lines every day because they have been hung on the wall of his Prime Minister's office. That is what I have read. And miles to go before I sleep. But I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. These lines are from a poem titled Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. That's a very famous poem. Actually, it is about the poet's attachment with nature. The poet feels that he gets lost in the enthralling beauty of nature. He has been on his way to some destination, but on the way he finds a beautiful jungle. Woods. Woods means forest or jungle. In fact, this jungle area belongs to someone. He doesn't know whose property it is. Still, its charm and grace is something very attractive that the poet gets lost. It is late evening, stopping by woods on a snowy evening. It is snowing, thick fall of snow. It is evening, soon it will get dark. And he has to go miles to reach his destination. Still, the poet feels that he cannot move. He's getting lost in the charm, in the beauty, in the enthralling, picturesque attraction of the landscape. There are certain such occasions in everyone's life when one feels captivated by the beauty of nature. That's why we select certain places. But all of a sudden, the poet realizes that he has to continue his journey and he cannot stick himself too much to that place. His horse, he has been traveling in a horse-ridden carriage. His horse just shakes his harness bells. When the horse shakes the harness bells, he is reminded of his duty. And it is a reminder that he has to continue his journey. So he continues his journey and concludes the poem with these philosophic lines. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have to keep my promises and miles to go before I sleep. The woods or the forest is dark, deep, lovely. But I cannot get lost because I have many responsibilities. Look at that. So these lines have been written by Frost, your poet. The great poet whose poems you have to study. Miles to go before I sleep means responsibilities. In life, everyone has responsibilities. We have our liabilities, we have our commitments, we have our duty, we have our occupations. And you have to perform what is destined for you. Being a teacher, I have to perform what is destined to me as part of my professional ethics, as part of my professional commitment. And being students, you have to perform what is destined for you. As students, you have to study, you have to absorb your lessons, you have to appear for exam, you have to score marks, you have to progress yourself and proceed a long way to academic heights, which will safeguard or secure your future in the long run. I think you understand what I tell you. So, what a wonderful... That is why we say his poems begin in delight and end in wisdom. I told you at the very beginning. They begin in delight, but end in wisdom. Ultimately, you get some wisdom. So I have been talking about a very famous poem of Robert Frost, that is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Then I will take you to another poem. I don't know whether you have studied these poems or not. There is another poem by Frost, and that is The Road Not Taken. And there, he talks about two choices in life. There are two roads, and a traveler feels rather a confusion, or he is in a dilemma as to which road he has to select. When two roads diverge in a yellow wood, the traveler stands confused. He feels that he cannot take a decision because both the roads appear almost equally the same. And which one to take, which one not to take, which one to accept, which one to reject, which one to follow, which one to discard is a matter of confusion as far as the traveler is concerned. See, don't you think that all of us have such confusions in life? Yes. At a time we feel that we should take this, but after taking that we will feel that we should have taken the other. You go to a fabric or a cloth shop and you select a piece of cloth, but on reaching home you feel that the thing that you didn't select is better. And there are certain women who will return to the fabric shop, hand over the sari and get something else. And they will do it many times. Life is like that. It offers many choices and asks us to select one. And that one should be wise, that one should be precise or clear, that one should be beneficial. That is the secret of success in life. Success is a matter of your selection. So you have your options. Go for medicine, become a doctor. Go for engineering, become an engineer. Go for some other course, become a professor. Go for something else, become a scientist. Go for something else, become a pilot. Go for something else and do this, do that, become this, become that. Everywhere we have options. And who is the successful candidate? The successful candidate, the one who is very precise, very wise, very clear, well calculated in his decision. So the point ultimately select a road that is unfrequented. There are two roads. The first road is already used by many. The second one remains unused. So usually our tendency will be to try the used road because we will get guidance and help from others. Do you understand? When you travel through a conditioned road, you feel safe because there are others who have used it before and you can ask advice, you can seek instructions, you can ask them to give you directions and other things. But whenever you try something new, it is a challenge because there is no one to help you. You have to cut it your way. You have to improve it in your own style. So, in the case of the poet, what does he do? In the case of the traveler in the poem, what he does is he selects an untrodden road and he says at the end of the poem that he has made all the difference. I'm talking about another poem of Frost. I haven't entered your poem. It will take a little time. I will introduce the poet. Okay. Such a great poet. So he says, so he selected an untrodden, unused, untried road, and that makes all the difference in his case. When everyone tries familiar ones, he tries unfamiliar ones. And that's a mark of his personality. That's an emblem of his individuality. That is a sign of his courage, confidence, willpower, and faith in himself. Can you understand? So Robert Frost is such a great poet who writes out of commonplace experiences of life. Very commonplace, very simple, very familiar experiences of life. Something that happens to you, say selection, that is a subject. Stopping, feeling attracted by the beauty of nature, that is a subject. Then there is another poem, Mending Wall. Mending wall is about repairing a compound wall. Two people are out to mend or repair the compound wall that separates their property. One moves along his side, the other moves along his side. And the wall which is damaged in winter season is in the middle. They have to get it repaired. Otherwise, there won't be any division between their properties. and they enter an argument. That is the poem. The title of the poem is Mending Wall. I think you remember these titles. In the poem Mending Wall, sometimes you are familiar with these poems. He talks about the concept whether a wall is needful or needless. One of the characters is the poet himself, and the poet believes that a wall is unnecessary. Why should we separate ourselves by constructing walls? In the world of nature, there is no division, separation, and segregation. Nature never tolerates anyone building walls on it. So even if you construct a wall very strongly, sometimes it will break and collapse because it is against the inherent spirit, against the inherent will and liking of nature. Nature doesn't tolerate it. Nature wants all the people, all the creatures, all the beings to live in unison, in mutual agreement, without any feeling of isolation, without any feeling of demarcation, without any feeling of separation and segregation. So what does nature do? It breaks walls. So the poet, the protagonist of the poem in Mending Wall says, we don't want walls. Walls are unnecessary. Look, I cultivate apple and you cultivate pine. My apple will never engross your pine, or your pine will never engross my apple. Then why should we have walls? But the neighbor says, no, we must have walls. Walls are necessary because his argument is a classic one. He says, good fences make good neighbors. That is a classic expression of Frost. That is in the poem Mending Wall. Good fences make good neighbors. He says that walls are needful. Walls will strengthen relationship. Walls will give a feeling of privacy and security. Walls are essential. Like that his argument goes. Okay. So that's a poem, Mending Wall. There are many poems, birches, about hanging trees, and in which one hangs a lot, one moves or sways a lot, and he thinks about many things about his childhood. Then there is a poem, Two Tramps in Mud Time. I tell you, Frost is such a distinguished writer, and it is your good fortune that you have a couple of poems of Robert Frost to study. So I have given you a very brief introduction about Frost. That's a very brief one. I think I can elaborate at any length, but since such overflown elaborations are not needed by you, since you want to focus more on the chapter and its significance, the thematic significance, I think I will just start the poem. Dust of snow, then fire and ice. I want you to read the poem silently. You have to focus upon your text and see whether this poem talks to you without my help. Because poetry is always like that. A poem has its own way of appealing a reader. Can you understand? A poem can have for different levels of meaning. You cannot say for certain that this is the meaning. No. When you analyze a poem in one way, another will analyze it in a different way. Ultimately, you ask the poet what he has in his mind when he writes the poem. He says, it's nothing that you have in your mind. So we say, who knows the course of a poem? Who knows the course of a poem? A poem goes on its own. So long as the poet writes the poem, it is his property. But when he writes the poem and hands it over to you, it is a property of someone else. A poem can have multiple interpretations. The way you understand a poem is not the way another understands. And that doesn't mean that your attitude is wrong or his attitude is right. No. A poem has multiple meanings. A poem has multiple significance. A poem has multiple implications. And if you have something to say about a poem in your own way, say it, because that is also acceptable. Can you understand? It is not like mathematical precision, calculation, or a theorem or a formula or a definition in subjects like physics or chemistry. No, it is abstract. It can take any form, it can take any shape. So it is your interest, your attachment, your application, your feeling that matters when you analyze, when you interpret, when you segment a poem. Okay, now let's have it.